Good morning, everyone. Here's an interesting one to start off the day. I once was chatting to a maths colleague of mine during my teaching days, and we were talking about fallacies of mathematics. And he said, yeah, well, of course, there is that fallacy where you can prove that 1 equals 2. And he took the whole thing, it's an algebraic equation, and you do this, and you square that, and you multiply it, and then you what the whole big thing. But there's a fallacy in the argument. But if you don't know about the fallacy, then you end up with the conclusion that 1 is equal to 2. Now, I tried something similar when I was in a class at one stage with the matric group when we had finished our whole syllabus. The exams had all been written. This was after trials or whatever it is. And we had a little bit of time to spare at the end of the lesson. And so I taught them what I knew to be a fallacy. Now, funny thing about it is that they said, oh, they don't believe me, they're going to go and ask my colleague. I thought, well, that's fine, because I know that my colleague wasn't familiar with that particular section of work. And so he simply said, well, if your teacher says it's right, it must be right. So they came back to me very puzzled. The important thing about a fallacy is you need to do it in a convincing way that everybody who's listening to that fallacy will believe it. And so we come around to our biblical reading today, and we're looking at St. Paul's letter to the Colossians, chapter 2. And he says, make sure that no one traps you and deprives you of your freedom by some second-hand, empty, rational philosophy based on the principles of this world instead of on Christ. So he was saying, even at that time, St. Paul was saying, there are people who will come up with arguments that sound reasonable, that sound rational, but be careful of them because they are teachings of this world, they're not the teachings of the Lord. Now, I have spoken to you recently about the whole concept that we have of AI, where people are able to present stuff which seems credible, but in fact, it's not true. And we need to be able to discern the difference between what's true and what isn't. And we can only do that by knowing the truth. And the truth is through Jesus Christ, as St. Paul says to us. So be aware of false prophets out there. Be aware of some people's desire to prove things, to defend their own argument, and be aware that sometimes what other religions might be saying to us are filled with flaws. Might sound credible, but they're flawed. And we need to be aware of what it is before we buy into that. Have a wonderful day. Be discerning, see what you can come up with. God bless. See you again. Bye-bye.